Hi, I'm David Chandler. I'm an assistant professor of English over at Tulsa Community College, and I'm also one of the public fellows for the Oklahoma Center for the Humanities for the 2019-2020 year. Um, and before I get started with my whole spiel, there are a couple of things I want to introduce you to first. So, this colorful thing is called King of Tokyo. It is a push your luck dice rolling game where you try to control the area of Tokyo, and everybody around the table is a big monster. It's essentially a B movie with big chunky dice, cards for power ups, a little bit of resource management, and a lot of take that sort of mechanics. This is Forbidden Desert. In this game, all the players have crash landed in a mysterious desert and they all try to work together in order to escape it. You use an economy of movement and action points, you get items that help you along the way, and generally you work together to find the pieces for a crashed airship so you can all escape. Everybody wins together, but everybody also loses together. This small box game is a game called Harbor. It's a worker placement game where everyone takes their adorable little goblin meeple and visits different shops among a harbor and a fantasy world. You have to play this shifting market game in order to get the most property. And whoever owns the most high value property at the end is the winner. Think of it like Monopoly, only less pointless. So, if you've never heard of any of those board games, you've probably never heard of some of the terms that I've used. Things like cooperative play, or push your luck, or worker placement. And if all of those are kind of unfamiliar to you, if you're not sure what an action economy is, then you're probably in the right place. I didn't know what any of those meant when I started playing board games. I got interested in board games a few years ago. I'd written about video games both professionally and casually while I was writing my dissertation over at TU. Um, and I found my interest in them maybe didn't wane, but there were these exciting things happening on the tabletop scene. Uh, Board games are in the midst of a sort of renaissance, a lot of people would say, especially in the past 10 years. Nowadays, with 3D printing technology, with internet communities growing up around these sort of niche hobby games, and especially with the advent of Kickstarter, where people who have an idea for a board game can go get funding, can crowdfund. They've sort of exploded in a very interesting way. Um, and so, if you're unfamiliar with board games at all, if you want to, or if you're interested in, some of the things that are happening in the scene, um, I want to put together a video and show off a few of the games in my collection uh, in order to see if that piques your interest. And to do that, I've organized it around three sort of ideas. That if you're willing to follow me on them, I think I might be able to convince you to give board games a shot. So, the three ways that I like to think about board games are first and foremost, a board game is an idea. When you put a game on a table, you're engaging with somebody or a team of somebody's ideas on how mechanics can communicate a theme, how art can put you in a different world. Um, so, first and foremost, board games are ideas manifest in plastic and cardboard. Secondly, board games are texts. They are texts to be read, much like a novel or a poem or a film. Um, and that's a bit tricky to do, but hopefully I can convince you that it's something worthwhile. Um, and lastly, board games are engines. They're engines for social interaction, they're engines for conversation. They are these massive working processes that, even in the smallest of games, can reveal something about ourselves. And the reason that I want to talk about them in the context of the humanities is because the tools that we learn when engaging with the humanities really show us an appreciation for or an understanding of these complicated things called games. Some are easy to learn, some are far more complicated than others. Um, but I guarantee that if you uh, come at them with an open mind, uh, if you've got 10 minutes for a game, if you've got 10 hours for a game, you'll find something worthwhile. So let's go through the list. So, first topic, games are ideas. They are these wonderfully crafted things. They take abstract concepts and try to make them concrete. Or they take something that you've seen in everyday life and they try to simulate it, or something exciting and they try to simulate it. For instance, if you've ever wondered what it would be like to turn bike racing into a board game, that would be an oddly specific question, but they've done it. Flamme Rouge is a wonderful game that simulates bike racing through playing cards to move your little plastic bicyclists. And it's a game all about tactical positioning and using momentum to move. Mechanically, it's not all that different than something like Candyland. You play a card, you move your cyclist X number of spaces. Or maybe they take a concept that we know really well, like trick-taking card games, and put a little twist on it. So if you're interested in games like Spades or Hearts, but you want to wrinkle it a little bit, The Fox and the Forest is a wonderful two-player game where the trump suit's always changing and you try to collect books, but you don't want too many or you get punished, and you don't want too few or you don't have enough points. And so it becomes this wonderful tug-of-war type game, and it's all wrapped up in this beautiful fairy tale aesthetic. It's one of my favorite new two-player games. Or they take stranger ideas, like, for instance, the game Mysterium. Everybody plays a psychic, except one player who is the ghost of a recently murdered individual. Now, that player tries to direct the psychics to their killer, but the ghost can't speak. So instead, they use these cards with these wonderful cryptic images to try to communicate with the other players, and it becomes a game of using very small bits of information to put together a story. So when I say games are ideas, I mean they are these big picture concepts made manifest in physical components. They are impossibly crafted things, and to watch them work and to engage with them is to engage with a concept in a way that is more physical than just an abstract discussion. Now, my second idea is that games are text to be read. Kind of like novels or films, they're meant to be interpreted as well as played. For instance, the same way a novel or a film might use history as a source of inspiration, games often do the same thing. Whitehall Mystery is a game that turns the 1888 Whitehall murders in London into a sort of hidden movement game where one person plays the criminal and the rest are constables trying to track them down. Now, obviously, with that sort of theme comes certain moral questions about whether it's right to turn a tragedy into a sort of game for play. The same way that we would talk about film or novels and the way that they sensationalize or rewrite the past. Games also engage with literary history, most notably H.P. Lovecraft, a supernatural horror writer in the early 20th century. Since most of his works are out of copyright, they've become huge fodder for board games. And so you can kind of explore the sort of haunted, tortured worlds of H.P. Lovecraft through play, through cooperative or competitive play. Games also tell their own stories, and some of those have a little bit of baggage as well. Small World is a lovely area control game with a fantasy theme that has some kind of dark implications about colonialism and extermination. You do horrible things to your opponents when you take over their areas, and people go into sort of decline. There's also like an unnamed native race that you have to first push out of areas before you can control it. Um, it's a deeply troublesome game, and a lot of those mechanics of colonialism show up in a lot of board games. And I think that it's worthwhile to engage with them the same way we would be critical of texts that do similar things. Some themes don't age all that well. Sometimes mechanics tell a story that is a bit troublesome. Uh, and I think that it's worthwhile to engage with these ideas in a fun, humanities focused way, um, because it really reveals insight as to how we sort of relate to each other, or we tell stories through mechanics, and we see certain troublesome things about ourselves and the media we consume. My last point is that games are engines. They are these theaters of processes whereby you interact with the components on the table as well as the other people that you're playing with. They are engines for conversation, for building relationships, for learning things about your opponents and your teammates, whether you're rolling dice to build a railroad or a highway system in Railroad Inc., which is a wonderful, charming game to play with pretty much anybody. Um, it can be an engine for being a sort of trader, or having a shootout with some friends in something like Bang the Dice game, where you roll dice to, if you're the sheriff, you're trying to get the outlaws. If you're the outlaws, you're trying to get the sheriff. Or you might be a renegade and completely turn your guns on your would-be allies. They can be engines for storytelling with something as relentlessly charming as Once Upon a Time, where you collectively tell a story based on the cards in your hand, and everybody's trying to get the story to come to a particular ending that they have as one of their cards. And the person who gets to their ending wins. It can also be a game of information. A party game like Codenames has you giving secret information to your teammates while hoping you don't reveal too much about yourselves to your opponents. So games are engines for social interaction, they're engines for strategy, they're engines for cross-table politics, and sometimes they're engines for all of these at the same time. This behemoth is Twilight Imperium. It is kind of everything the board game. Galactic politics, dice combat, area control. It is massive and ridiculous. It takes up a stupid amount of space and takes about 8 hours to play. And an engine that I like just as much is this 16 card game called Love Letter, a game about passing a love letter to a princess and deducing which cards your opponents have. And it plays in 5 minutes. So, games are engines of all sizes. And they have all of these processes by which you can play with not just the components of the table, but interact with the people around you in order to kind of collectively tell a story or build a world or pass each other secrets. Games are engines for interaction as much as they're text to be read or ideas to be explored. So hopefully I've at least piqued your interest in board games and shown you a little bit of what they have to offer. It's a really fascinating scene to get into. And over the course of a couple of more blog posts, I'll talk about some in depth. But if you're looking for something to occupy your time during our current situation, there's never been a better time to get into board gaming. You can get them shipped from a number of places like Amazon, of course, Cool Stuff Inc., Miniature Market, um, or check and see if you have a local game shop if they're offering any curbside services. Um, and I also want to encourage you when you do play a game to ask yourself those kind of three questions. What's the idea being communicated here? How can I read this like a text? Uh, and what is this engine doing? How does it help kind of reveal this sort of theater of processes? Or how does it help build relationships among people at your table? Because I promise you that staying in the hobby long enough, you can see some really interesting things happen. So, pick up a game. If you don't have one near you, order one. And I will talk about some more from my collection that I think are really good starter games or some that do things that I find particularly interesting. Um, I don't know, I haven't written the script yet. But for now, take those three ideas and see if you can apply it to uh, either some of the board games in your collection or venture out and purchase one yourself. Um, I've listed some resources down in the blog below, so look those over and happy gaming.